Ever struggled to lay quality smooth curves? Well, let me show you how I've done these. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie, and now we need to turn the clock back 4 days. Well, here we are with the 3 new boards in place. This one here, the Popular Ply one, was made by DCC Train Automation. And I changed my mind because what I've decided to do was to leave that radiator in place, and therefore this wouldn't fit. So they then knocked up another board for me, which I now call board 1 of the fiddle yard. And because the radiator's there, we had to move things around a little bit. But so what I've done is I've actually cut this one, I cut a section out of this board, and to allow a sort of a small L to come around as the fiddle yard goes through 90 degrees. Now, Lee Stoddard, who is, what should we call him, my track planning guru, let's say, he turned around and said, actually, Charlie, you need a small fillet in here. And it's quite obvious, really, though it was one of those things, again, that I just couldn't see. But when you fit second radius curve in here, you realise how much of the board is actually wasted. So by putting this fillet section in, and you can pull this right up towards the edge, and then if I put a third radius curve behind it, and that's where the second radius curve was. So by adding this small fillet section, it actually gives you an extra track to get around. And the dimensions here are quite tight because I actually need to get 9 tracks to curve around this board. Hopefully you remember from past videos that I'm building these fiddle yard boards in a modular sense, in that if I have to move house, I can split the boards up quite easily, both electrically and physically, and then, like I say, move to a double garage in my forever home, let's say. And to that end, I've made these last couple of boards here out of birch ply with CLS legs, and I made the mistake because the weather was quite poor last week. I made some of the boards up inside and outside, and as you can see here, made quite a mess. Using power tools is clearly not without risk, and if you do this sort of work, then please make sure you're not at home on your own whilst you take these circular saws and do battle with your timbers, let's say. But at the end of the day, I've bolted them all together with M8 coach bolts and nuts. They're not bolted to each other at the moment. So what I'm going to do next is, just before we lay the track, is these last 2 boards here need to be permanently bolted together. So now we need to figure out a laying of the track. It might seem logical to start there at the end of the first fiddle yard ladder and then run those tracks around into these curves. But I think I'll do it the other way around. I think I'll start here on this board where all these tracks will terminate, and then run through the curve so the curves are dead right. And then all I need to do then is line up with those tracks and run for there. So this is the any rail plan drawn up by Lee, and this is board 1 with the fiddle yard ladder, cross board 2, board 3, which is the main one we're working on now, and the small one, board 4. This is board 5. This is a future issue, let's just say, as it contains 14 points, and I'd like to be able to build it on its side, but it is a bit of a monster. So what we're going to do now is we will lay the tracks onto board 4, they will come around onto board 3, into 2, and then join up with 1. Well, how normal for me to over-engineer things, and he ends up sitting on his model railway board. Okay, I do understand that I'm in a very fortunate position with this channel, and I've got to give a massive shout out to Jim Vince of Durban Garden City. And please do look up his channel, and he's in the middle of building his new layout, and he ripped out 2 helix, and I watch a great deal of YouTube channels. I get ideas from them and so on. I don't always leave comments, but anyway, I mentioned to him when he's ripping out his helix, he said he's going to try and sell his track on eBay, And so I've bought a great deal of track from him, and I must confess it was at an extremely reasonable price. And to that end, Jim, thank you very much indeed. So that's Jim Vince, Durban Garden City, if you want to look him up. Now, to lay all this track, what I thought I would do is I'd try out this new tool from Golden Valley Hobbies. And that's, and if you're interested, it's goldenvalleyhobbies.com. And in this bag are 2 curved track spacer guides. So I imagine with these adjustable little wing nuts, obviously you pop these in the track and you make your arcs the way your tracks come around. So we shall put these to the test in a moment and see how we get on. I've laid the tracks out, and as I mentioned, the 2nd, 3rd and 4th radius curves. The 4th radius is from Hornby, the 2nd and 3rd are from Pico, and all this flex track now is standard Pico code 100. Working out the spacings, especially this little gizmo, it puts 3 inches between track centres. So all I need to do with this is measure 3 inches between the centres of these studs and space the tracks out accordingly. And there you can see the 3 inches between the track centres. And as you can see, there's a reasonable gap between each one, so space isn't as tight as I thought. As these flex tracks will take the turn, each one will need a join in the curve. Now that's the problem with flex track, is to avoid getting dog legs as the track makes it around the turn. And tomorrow morning when I come back, I'll show you how I intend to lay this with avoiding any dog legs whatsoever. In the meantime, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cover these 2 boards with the foam underlay that I showed you before. And this is the stuff here that I bought from Wix, and I've used it on the Helix and also on board 1. Well, as you'd expect, it's now the following day, and the underlay is stuck down very well, and I used neat PVA. I didn't dilute it at all, I just put it down there and splodged it on. I'd not necessarily recommend that you go and buy this underlay. It's for laminated floor, and the reason I mention that, it does damage quite easily. You know, you can sort of make dents in it, and you know, it's not like cork where it's quite resilient, but this stuff isn't. But the reason I went for it is because I needed it for the Helix. This is what's left over, and at the end of the day, in the fiddle yard area, it shouldn't get much wear, so I'm not exactly dropping spanners on it all day. I've had a little bit of a change of mind about the track, and I'm not going to use 2nd, 3rd and 4th radius curves. I've got more room here than I really realised. So I'm now going to use 3rd and 4th radius and then go on to Pico code 100 flex track. I've got these gauges set to give me 2 5/8 of an inch separation between the track centres, and I think that worked out at something like 67 millimetres in new money. So what I'm going to do now is we'll take a little look at how I intend to join the curves on this board without getting those hideous dog legs. Now I'd just like to take a couple of minutes with what should we call it, Parish Notices, let's say. Next Thursday, December the 24th, I will release the Christmas video, as it were. But what I'd like you to do, if you could, is contribute to the video, any questions you've got on what I've done this year or any issues that you've had. And one thing that did sort of prick up my ears was the Hornby Model of the Year Awards 2020. And in 3rd place was the Hornby Stania Princess. In 2nd was Hatton's new Class 66. And in 1st place, the winner was Stephenson's Rocket, also from Hornby. Now, as time has gone on, obviously, you know, have these locos survived the test of time? Because I watch a great deal of YouTube videos, and I know that some of these products have had interesting issues, let's say, trying to be kind. So if you've bought one of these locos and it's been brilliant, then give it a thumbs up and let me know. And if you've had other experiences, shall we say, let me know. And because I'd like to take a little look at exactly how these locos that are the 3 best available 00 in the UK have stood up now that we, the voting public, have voted for them, and perhaps they might not be quite as useful as they first appeared. Okay, right, let's crack on. If you enjoy this channel, then please give my videos a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, then please do hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell icon for all, and you'll get a notification of when I launch a new video. Now, it's pretty obvious to all of us that if you bend a piece of flex track, then the rails will either poke out or recede. Now, as you can see, the inside track has come out because it has less distance to travel than the outside track. And conversely, if I do it the other way, out pops the outside track, or becomes the inside track, really, isn't it? But this stems to be the problem with the dog legs that appear. So here we have, smack in the middle here, just two fish plates, and they're exactly, the tracks are parallel. And obviously, if I were to pin this down and then bend them, then hopefully you can see the track backing off and you get a bit of a gap appear. So how can you get around this? Well, the easiest way to do is to maintain a smooth curve is, I find that if you use these track setter templates, and if I pop it into there, I've got a pretty smooth curve, and if I push that other rail, then the gap closes up and I'm left with a reasonable curve. And now what I can do, if you're into pinning track, let's say, you could use the small Pico SL14s that I tend to use, and then just drill small holes in some of the sleepers and pin it down. You may well know, if you're a regular to the channel, that actually I don't like to pin at all. I tend to use copy decks and glue it into place. But again, I use the track setter templates, if at all possible, to get the track smooth. If you use the Pico pins, they are, the Hornby pins, they are particularly bigger than the other ones. But of course, pins aren't the only way, and I've recently discovered, though I could be the last person on earth to know about these things, and these are track screws from Pico, not to be confused with Pico. And it's P-I-K-O. They're built for HO. Well, these particular ones are for HO track, but I'm sure you realise that this track really is HO scale. It's just that the locomotive stock is 00, and you can simply drill a hole in these sleepers, or some come pre-drilled, and these will go in quite easily. They are reasonably discreet, and then once painted in, you could hide these quite easily, and they are countersunk. And these are the three fasteners in question then together. This is the Hornby track pin, here's the Pico track pin, and there's the Pico track screw. And as you can see, they're all rather small. The Hornby one as a pin is quite industrial, really. The Pico one is quite discreet, and there's the Pico screw. But the advantage of the Pico screw is that you can obviously unscrew it quite easily, move the track around a little bit, and then screw it back down. You might have to pre-drill the sleepers to get the screw in, but then that may well be the case with the others, should you be using streamlined track. But these are good options for keeping your track curves very, very smooth. Is to harness them down to your baseboard firmly using this type of arrangement. Once you've set it in place, hopefully using the Pico track setter curve templates to make sure it's right. So we all appreciate how difficult it is to avoid dog legs in some cases, especially when you're coming off a point if you're going to go straight into a turn. But if you're not around points, is there another way of doing it? Well, as these tracks will slide, yes there is, because the problem really stems the fact that both tracks terminate at the same place. So what if I were to terminate one track a great deal further on in the line? So let's say I extend this track out to here, put the fish plate there, and therefore I've staggered the join. So let's take a look at that. So now here you can see that I've removed that piece of rail from there, and also the sleepers from this section. I've put in 2 fish plates, and whilst I'm on the subject of fish plates, is try to do this always with brand new fish plates, because if you use old ones they get splayed and you might not get the electrical contact that you're really after. So now all you're faced with now is the fiddly bit of trying to thread this rail through these chairs and then up to these fish plates. Of course, different tracks will be easier or harder, let's say. I mean, if you're using code 75 bullhead, this clearly might not be an option. But with a little bit of patience, I'm sure that we'll get there. And after some fiddling, there you can see the 2 fish plates in place, and then once you pin it down and you start to flex it around, you don't get those dreadful dog legs. Now I'm sure it won't come as a surprise that there's yet another option, and that is once you've got your track together, you could simply solder the 2 rails inside the fish plate. Obviously you're going to apply the solder to the outside rails, not the inside, because it would interfere with the flanges, but that's much more of a permanent solution, let's say. If you're in an environment where you're prone to extremes of temperature, let's say you're in a loft, that might not be a very sensible idea whatsoever. It's easier on a curve because as the rails expand and contract, the curve will absorb some of that. But if it's on a ballasted run, you might find that the track will buckle and tear itself out of the ballast. In my case, I am going to solder the fish plates together on those initial curves, but at the end of the day, this is in a central heated room, and it's going to be glued to that foam underlay, so there is movement that will allow it. But it's just a case of, for you perhaps, is just to analyse all these various options. And once more, it's the following day, and I have fitted yesterday evening the 3rd and 4th radius set track curves, and they're glued down with copy decks. And now I want to move on to the first of the flex track fittings. So where do we go from here? Well, what I've got is I've got a track setter gauge, and that's a 36-inch gauge. And what I've done with this is just given this curve its curvature, as it were. I've run it through to give it a little bit of a natural bend. I've got my Pico screws, and I've measured the width of them because I wanted obviously to pre-drill a hole, and these are about 1.4 mil, and this is about a 1.6 mil drill. And I've also got those Golden Valley gauges and some of the Pico 6-foot weigh gauges to use as well. So what do we do from here? Oh, one thing I would want to mention first, and that is if you're going to lay let's say straight track or whatever, and you're thinking of using these Pico pins, if you lay all your track and screw it down with these pins and leave it for a couple of weeks to see how it goes, and you think, yeah, that's good to go, then you can ballast your track and check it all out, make it all nice and sweet. And then, of course, the ballast will hold the track down. You can just simply unscrew these pins, unscrew these screws. They'll come out quite easily. Far easier than it will trying to wrench out Pico or Hornby track pins and then just fill the hole and then, as you normally would, weather the track. So please don't think that these are just used for flex track. I think these are a nifty little item that could be used all over your layout. And if you don't want the screw heads showing on your scenic areas, no big deal. Once you've ballasted, just unscrew them. Right, let's get started and fit this first track. So what I've done is I've drilled a hole in this sleeper and in this sleeper. I haven't drilled it on the outside one because when it comes to fitting the next track, that sleeper may well be removed. So I've got 2 pilot holes drilled, and the next thing is to line this track up with these, and using these tasty little gauges from Golden Valley, if I fit one there, and one there. Is that right? Yep. Then I know this, I want this piece of rail to run straight, so I can simply drill my little hole in there, pop the screw in, same with the second one. And we've got our track parallel before we go into the curve. And then really it's just a case now of ensuring this curve sweeps naturally, which these gauges should do us. So if I now drill another hole, fit another screw, and then simply make our way, simply make our way down the track. So now we find ourselves at the first join, and again I've secured it with the two gauges, as it were, and I need to pre-drill some holes. Well, that one's got one already in and the chairs are intact, so I must make sure that one's big enough. And looking here, yep, the chair's intact on that one as well. And there is absolutely no kinks in there whatsoever. So once we screw this one down again, it's just a case of repeating the process as we make our way down the board. And then pull this one out, and then place it further down the track. Let's face it, these things are pretty nifty. I actually wish I'd bought 4 because I could sort of lay them out and go one after the other. But these, along with these screws, certainly are a useful way of making sort of parallel tracks. Of course, if you wanted your tracks to be have a separate distance, you know, so this distance would be greater than this one, then clearly you could expand one and then reduce the other one to give you, you know, a different running dimension, as it were. So there we go. What I shall do now, because I'm still going to use copy decks, I shall whip this track back up again and put some glue underneath it with the copy decks and re-screw it, so that when I'm done I can take these screws out, so I will get no chance of any noise coming from the track through the screws into the baseboard, because if you're a regular to this channel, you know I have an obsession with track rumble through these boards. Well, this is the homeward stretch, as they say. So I'm just putting a spot of copy decks on this one, and this is the 9th track. With this, with 8 and 9 here, I'm still unsure whether this is where these tracks will stay. What I actually might do is put a couple of points in here to lighten the load on that next board, but it won't be too difficult to change this afterwards. I did mention about pulling out these screws afterwards, and what I actually might do is leave them in and then do a little trial to see if taking them out actually does make it any quieter. So I'll probably leave them in now until the locos are actually running on this piece of track. What's worth mentioning as well, if I can zoom that camera in, is I don't think I explained very well this item, because there are cuts here where the rails fit in, and that's how it hooks up into the tracks and gives it you know, the sort of rigidity to make it work as a decent template. So now switching to this last piece of track, those two hook into the existing ones, and then that one hooks into the new track. The next one alongside, pull the track along, and then last one's locked in. And then all I do again is repeat what I've shown you in the past, is on a sleeper where the chairs are intact, is if I turn it the right way, it might have a better effect. A couple of screws, and then straight down the rest of the track. Well, that's the laying of all the curved track now complete, and those 9 lines to me look pretty good, really. The nearest two lines to us now, there may be a couple of points going in there to relieve the pressure on board 5, but I think it looks pretty good. And obviously the spacing is absolutely accurate, and that is due to the Golden Hobbies track guides. Looking at the boards together as we go from the Fiddle Yard board 1 through board 2, where I've just laid the track in place, and then onto the board we've just done, board 3, and you can see how it's sort of shaping up. Once those other tracks are laid in place, I will have used 30 yards of track, so it's no small undertaking. And once the track is secured and wired in, I can return the viaduct back into its normal location. Well, I do hope you found that interesting, and I'm quite pleased with the way it's turned out, but there is still a great deal of work to do. It probably won't come as a shock to you that I got these templates from DCC Train Automation, and also along with the Pico screws. And I'll leave a link to James's shop down in the description. Someone also mentioned about other products that I promote. Well, I wouldn't promote anything I don't recommend, and there is a link to Amazon. I have a sort of an Amazon shop down in the Show More tab, which may or may not be of interest. Summing up, where do I go from here? Well, next week is the Christmas one, so as I mentioned earlier, please leave a comment below if any subject you'd like me to touch on or whatever, and hopefully it'll be more of a jolly video rather than a serious how-to, let's say. I would of course like to thank the people who help the channel along, and that's people who subscribe and also the patrons. Without you guys I couldn't do it. I couldn't get the camera gear and everything else that I need to produce these videos, so thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to become a patron, there's the button. It costs about the same as a cup of coffee, and if you haven't subscribed, there's the button. You should be ashamed of yourself, and a video here and here. See you next week. Take care. Bye bye.